Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Years ago, when I started running what is now AmSpirit Business Connections, I was working with one of the chapters, and I got a call. I got a call from a member, and they were really upset about something that somebody said, and they heard it, and I would have been upset too. I don't exactly remember the particulars. I just remember the general feel of it, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk to that member, and I called that member, and I said, so and so said you said this, and he said, well, I did, but that's not what I meant. And they were speaking about a third person, or commenting on a third person, what a third person said. So I called the third person, and I said, well, person A says this, person B says this. What do you think? What you say was, and the third person said, I didn't mean any of that. And at that point, I realized that, what, we think we communicate, we try, but we don't necessarily hit with one another. And that's I think John Maxwell said it, the greatest fallacy in communication is thinking that it happens at all. Or maybe it wasn't him, but somebody along those lines. And it's so very true. Today's guest is Milo Shapiro, and he is he's a public speaking coach. He's a communicator, improv. I want him to tell the story. Started as computer programming, because that's just a direct route to being a public speaking coach.
Makes no sense. I know.
It makes no sense. Hey, look at me. Look what I do. Anyhow, Milo, welcome to the program. I really appreciate you being here. Well, I've set you up. I want to hear the story, because
okay. So here's the odd story of how I got to where I am, and there's a bunch of bumps in the middle. I was a computer programmer because I was a very practical 18-year-old and wanted to major in something that I could make money at. And I was good at it. There was nothing wrong with my coding skills. But year after year in a cubicle, I started to realize this is not me. This is not what I love. It's fine for getting through the day. And I probably never talked about it with anyone after hours. But during that same time, back in 1990, I discovered improvisation. The first time I saw improv, I just remember my jaw dropping, thinking, I'm supposed to be doing that. That I should be up there. That's me. That's my kind of fun. And I started taking classes and got into a troupe and ended up teaching improv. And improv was my weekends, my vacations. I was traveling the whole West Coast, even into Canada from San Diego, to study with some of the masters of improv.
Can you just quickly explain to people what improv is?
Yes, everyone. So thanks, because it's not stand up, because of that TV show Evening at the Improv that confused people forever, because no improv happened there. It was stand up. Stand up is very, very rehearsed. Improv is a bunch of people get together, and based on an idea from the audience, they create scenes. There's different games. The whole show is made up on the spot. It'll never be the same twice, and you got to be there and catch it. And it's delightful. And one of the fun things about it is that it fails. If 70% of a show works, that's a good show. So you have to have a great attitude, and it's a wonderful camaraderie. If you bomb in stand up, you go home just feeling crummy. But if you bomb in improv, you've got a team to sit. What did we do wrong? What could we have done different? And but when you tried that was at least a good try. There's that wonderful sense of working together that I loved about improv.
Well, I thank you for explaining that. But improv is life.
Yes. Right? I never know when I pick up the phone what's going to happen. There's no script. If you have a script of what I should be accomplishing tomorrow, I'd really like to see it, because if I knew exactly what to say to achieve a certain outcome, that'd be wonderful. But that's not how life works. We're always improvising. So knowing what things are likely to work for or against us is certainly going to help us.
Okay, back to the story, improv.
Back to the story. And then we will backpedal a lot, probably. So in 1999, my company was offered voluntary separation packages because of a merger. There was too many of us. And I had seen on one of these new things called a website. They were brand new, these things called websites.
I think I've heard of it.
yeah, they caught on after that. A company in Maryland, on the other side of the country, that was using improv for team building. And I looked at their website and thought, yes, that game teaches listening skills. That game teaches building on each other's ideas. And they listed literally what games they played. I said, well, that's not even a good game for creative problem solving. A better game. I just made a little list one day of if I ever taught this course, but I wasn't going to quit my day job. And now they were offering me 6 months salary to quit my day job. So I started a company called Improv Ventures, doing team building events with improv games. And it kind of took off. I got a following pretty quickly and got companies that liked the idea of their people being out of their element, playing these games with each other, getting feedback from me. And I could say things to people about their communication that their bosses didn't feel comfortable saying, partly because I was an outsider, but more because I was talking about the game. If I have Dave and Tina playing something and they're struggling and they can't win the game, I can walk over and say, Dave, I think I know what the problem is. You keep building on the last thing you just said. Stop for a moment and build specifically on the thing Tina just said. Yes, go. And all of a sudden they're having more fun and they're winning the game and they're high-fiving each other. And the manager is in the corner and comes over to me later. I wanted to say that to Dave for years. He always does that. How come you could just say that to him? I just helped him win a game. You're criticizing his work performance. Which one is he going to hear better? Yeah. So people are always saying things in the team building like, what happened in that game? That's what happens in our staff meeting. Or a client pulled that crap on me on the phone the other day. It wasn't fun then, even though the dynamics were the same. So people were getting a lot out of this program that I called team improvising. Well, after about a year or two of doing that, people in the team improvising classes, which were usually between 10 and 20 people, started saying to me, this is really powerful stuff. You should be more like a motivational speaker and get whole crowds playing these games, not just small groups of us. I said, well, you can't just go in and play games for an hour with a huge crowd and call that a keynote speech. And I made that comment one time to someone at an improv festival and he laughed. I said, what's so funny? He goes, you don't know who you're talking to, do you? I said, I know you play for the Las Vegas team. He said, I'm also the president of my chapter of the Las Vegas National Speakers Association. And yes, you can play with your audience in that way, but you have to build it into a speech. Join your local chapter of National Speakers Association. So I did. I created this keynote called We Gotta Fail to Succeed, about developing a healthy relationship with failing and not being perfect all the time, because that's how we grow and get better. If we play it too safe, we're stuck. And for half of the speech, I do get the whole audience playing these games. And that was supposed to be the whole business. But what happened was people kept lingering after my speeches and saying, would you work with me on my speaking skills? Would you come and work with my staff? And for a while, I just kept saying, no, that's not what I do. I had years in Toastmasters and I've learned a lot from NSA, but helping others isn't what I was taught to do. Well, one day this guy came up to me after one of my presentations and he said, I really think I need you to help me with something. And I once again explained, this isn't what I do. He said, yeah, but I think you're the one I need and I need help fast. I said, well, what is it? He said, I sell on QVC, the home shopping network, and it's all 7-minute time slots, and 90% of the sales that I do, he sells plants. 90% of my company's business is selling it for QVC. And they just told me, you're not good enough on camera. The audiences aren't liking you. You're not selling enough. If you don't do more next time, we're going to cut you. And he said, it'll destroy my business. I need help fast. And he, I had nothing to lose by it. He had nothing to lose by working with me. I said, let's give it a shot. He brought over his VHS tapes of him on QVC. This is 2004, so there were no DVDs recording yet. And I watched them and I said, yeah, I can see some things that you absolutely need to work on that are interfering and keeping people from wanting to buy from you. So I worked with him a couple of times. He went back to Pennsylvania 2 weeks later to do his time slot. And 5 minutes into the time slot, they said to him, we understand you also have plant food. Tell us about your plant food. And he's like, why are we talking about my plant food? I need to sell my plants. I don't even have any plant food here, but he didn't say that. I told him, one of the things I taught him was don't fight with the hostess, because he was doing that. But most of his problem was his energy and his wording of things. And so he said, all right. So he talked about the plant food. 2 more minutes ticked by. And after they're done, he said, why did you switch to the plant food? I want to sell the plants. She said, you sold every single plant. We had no more product and we couldn't have 2 minutes of dead air. You were completely different on camera. What'd you do? And he said, I hired a speaking coach. And I said, did you give them my card? Because that could have been life-changing for me. Oh, no, I didn't think of that. Darn, QVC doesn't know me. But I thought, wow, maybe I do have a knack for figuring out how to help people. So I added that to my website. SEO was way easier in 2004 than it is now.
Yeah.
And now I'm probably 70% speaking coach, 20% speaker, and 10% a couple of other things, including the team building. So it's been an interesting, rocky road, but a fun one. And I think if I had my, people say you have to have your vision, you have to have your business plan, you have to work it. I'd still be marketing team building now instead of something that I've ended up being far more successful with, So sometimes you have to say, is the plan necessarily the good plan? You can't get too caught up in the shiny penny, but you can figure out whether you can fit it into your mold and see what takes. And in this case, that was the thing that took the most. Much as I love the team building and much as I love speaking, the coaching seems to be what's found me as I've gotten older.
Well, I think it's kind of where society is right now, right? I mean, things change so fast.
Yeah.
You're a little younger than I am, maybe a lot younger. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But I
don't
remember
think so.
I'm going to the guidance counselor, and there were like buckets, right? Oh, you're a guy, you want to help people. You could be a policeman or a firefighter, right? You're a woman, you could be and I know this is horribly sexist, but you could be a nurse or a teacher, right? And
Yeah.
so there were 7 or 8 buckets, right? Engineer, you like building things, you're an engineer. You know, like math. You know, now it's like there's 1,000 buckets, you know, and you could be aiming towards one, and then like I'm going to be a computer programmer, and now I'm going to do this, and that's essentially what you did.
The one thing I went to school for is the one thing I just still don't do. There is no certification program to call yourself a team builder or a motivational speaker or a coach. And there's pros and cons to that. It opens the door to be able to try things, but it also means you have to do more research to find out who's for real and how long have they been doing it and what are they at. I mean, when I started doing coaching, I kind of felt like a fraud, but I had helped this one guy. So maybe now I have 19 years of having helped hundreds of people one-on-one, thousands if you count my keynote audience is based on my book, Public Speaking, Get A's, Not Z's. I keynote on that. So people in those audiences are applying those things. It's probably tens of thousands at this point. But there is that threshold of, is everybody out there all they claim to be? Because it is so open. It's the Wild West still. And everyone, it's buyer beware.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not like the law or accounting where you have to have this certification, you have to pass this big test. It's, you know what, I'm going to quit my job and be a speaking coach tomorrow.
Exactly.
So
I could pass that bar if there was such a legal bar right now, but when I started, I couldn't. I just had to convince people that I was the right person for them because of the kind of person I was. It took a while, but now thankfully my credentials are there, even if they're not credentials like passing the bar.
But it sounded like you had a feel for, you watch this guy's VHS tapes and you have a feel for, okay, this isn't hitting for whatever reason.
I could see 2 or 3 things clearly that were interfering with his ability to communicate in the way that he wanted to. Some of it was in his words, but a lot of it was in his energy. Yeah. He was very frenetic. Because he wanted to keep his energy up, he would raise it, and then that was his new bar, so he had to raise it again, and he looked like he was kind of losing it instead of looking energetic. So I taught him a technique that I literally made up on the spot. I've used it since then, called the rise and drop. So he was talking about plants. This should be relaxing. The garden is not an exciting place. The garden is a beautiful, peaceful place. So it was, the plant comes in the mail, you put it in the garden, you're planting, and before you know it, pause, drop, the flowers are coming and your neighbors are commenting. So now slow back down to a lower place so we can go back into that and it gives him a place to raise from again. And he raised and dropped a number of times, because I got to watch the tape of him in the one that he went back for, and I was like, oh, good, raise and drop. He did it a few times. So that was one of the techniques that I taught him, and I thought it up on the spot. That was my improv background. I could think things up on the spot, but clearly I could see that his energy was a problem. So I had to have some insight for that. And Toastmasters did help me with that. And I was probably there 6 or 7 years. The problem with Toastmasters, wonderful as it is that it's not personalized. You're following a set program. You're getting feedback from people who may or may not know what they're exactly talking about. And if you have a 25-minute program you want to practice, there's no opportunity to. You're always doing the next 6-minute speech from the book. Yeah.
No. Yeah. That's, I spent 2 or 3 years in Toastmasters. You're right. Great organization.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot of people off the mat, if you will. Yep. But you get to a point where it's like, all right, this is done. This is done enough for me. Maybe not all of it, but enough.
And I've also seen someone leave crying after trying to do their icebreaker and leave because she wasn't ready to be up in front of a group. It wasn't a question of good or not. She was just terrified. And it reinforced her terror, unfortunately. Had I had a chance to work with her one-on-one, where it was just me and her, either in person or on Zoom, which is where most of my clients are nowadays, she might have gotten better enough, built up enough confidence enough that she could have faced Toastmasters. So it's, there's pros and cons. I mean, it is a really lovely organization. I'm very glad I did it, but it was in my building. I did it on my lunch hour. It was convenient. It was easy. It's not, if you tell, I've had people say to me, I have to give a speech in 3 weeks. Should I join Toastmasters? I'm like, yes, in 2012. But since you didn't, no, you're not gonna master this in 3 weeks by joining a Toastmasters club.
Yeah, but it's very inexpensive. At least it was. It was very inexpensive, and worthwhile if you want to commit to a couple of years of trying to hone your skills.
Yeah.
The power of stories. I mean, it's one of the things that your kind of your intake sheet for being on the podcast. You'd mentioned the power of stories, and I'll just tee you up with that.
I didn't remember that's what I put. I thought, oh, how intuitive of Frank to bring that up. So apparently,
damn,
I
missed my chance.
I guess so. Yeah, I feel really strongly about the power of stories. When I wrote my book, Public Speaking, Get A's, Not Z's, the San Diego Bar Association came across it and asked if I would give a keynote based on it. And they picked out all the things they wanted me to cover, and they did a really good job. I mean, they took the work out of it in many ways for me. I said, I love what you picked, but there's one thing you skipped that I feel strongly about. Could I include the power of story as well? Because I don't think lawyers are exempt from needing to be good storytellers. They were like, oh yeah, if that matters to you, go ahead. And it ended up being a big, strong part of the program. The audience complimented that. So I'm glad I suggested that on top of their ideas, things to do with your voice and other things that they picked out. But stories are really powerful because of the way our brains work. Data is all processed in the left side of the brain, and it just kind of resides there. You take it in and it kind of sits. Stories, because of the fact that they're more complicated and there's data within them to process, but there's also facts and feelings, it goes back and forth between the left and right hemispheres, and it's almost like making deeper footprints in the sand. So the data that you do share in your stories and that you share based on the moral of that story, the data is likely to stay with the person more and be more repeatable later. So you empower that person to tell other people if they've stored more of it because of the stories. We think back, like if I were to say to you the story of the tortoise and the hare. I don't remember anyone telling me that story. I don't even remember all the details of it, but I bet you remember that the lesson is slow and steady.
Right, wins the race.
Yeah. So the lessons stay with us because of the story, even if the stories themselves. I mean, I know that there was like the rabbit took a nap. I don't think I could tell the story. It's vague, but the lesson, absolutely. Because the story makes that happen. And what I do with people is I help them to find the stories in the data. One of my clients was doing this huge data dump, and he stopped halfway through his rehearsal and he goes, "This is boring, isn't it?" I said, "It's not one of your most most interesting presentations." Yeah. He said, "What's missing?" I said, "It's impersonal. It's just data, 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 data. There's no thing to latch onto." So what we did instead was we created a story about a woman who hit all 5 of the problems his healthcare company was trying to make changes for. And then at the end of the story, he said to his people, "Don't worry, that wasn't a real person. I made her up." And they all went, "Oh, phew." But he said, "But we all know that we've come across people who've hit 2 or 3 of those problems. So now I want to talk to you about 5 things I want to change here in XYZ Health Company so that we don't have a Mrs. We called her Mrs. Gonzalez. So we don't have a Mrs. Gonzalez caught in our system again." And as they were able to relate the data to what happened to Mrs. Gonzalez in the story he started from, instead of being bored by it, they were riveted by how he solved her problem and their problem thereby in the process, all just by adding a story that we crafted and was well told and had some drama to it with ups and downs and pausing in the right places and all those other things we should do well in good speaking. But the story is what sold the data.
Yeah, I one of my franchisees is a professional speaker. His name's Matt Ward, and I watch him present, and people lean into the stories. Yeah. I mean, they literally are leaning in because you don't know what's coming, right? I mean, if somebody's shooting data, okay, all right, I'm getting revenue, I'm getting expenses. What's coming next? Oh, profit or loss, right? You know what's going to happen. But with the story, it's like they don't know where he's going, and he's been well coached. He's crafty enough to know that it's going to break people's thinking machines. They're going, he's going to take them out into left field or wherever. It's like, oh my God, that's hilarious. But they're literally leaned into him.
Yeah. As long as the story is not what happened to Abraham Lincoln when, because
Right.
if you're just taking, unless it's an obscure story, then maybe. But if it's what happened to Frank last Tuesday when he was at the supermarket and the cashier, no one knows that story. It's
Right.
yours. Or your mom's story, the story that's been through your family forever and we still laugh at it. Okay, maybe 10 people in your family know it, but your audiences don't. And it's finding those and then being able to twist them in different ways. There's a story that I tell about my grandfather that I actually kick off one of my keynotes with, the keynote, "We Got to Fail to Succeed." No, I take that back. The public speaking one. I start with a story about my grandfather, and the way I tell it, I don't want to ruin that story in case anybody ever hears it, but it's about how he didn't communicate the way he should have. He didn't take the time to communicate effectively, didn't get what he wanted. And as I'm telling the story, people have no idea why I'm telling this story until I get to the end where it has a funny ending coming out of the fact that he didn't get what he wanted. And then I explain how, as speakers, when we don't communicate effectively and don't get what we want, we lose the chance to be clear, interesting, moving, potentially repeatable. So people go, oh, that's why he told that story. But that story, I can tell different ways. I can just change a few facts in it, and it could be a project management story, change a few others, and it could be a customer service story. I can use that story different ways by emphasizing different things. And so you don't have to have 100 different stories. If you have 4 or 5 good ones, you can spin them different ways, as long as it's not the same audience.
Right. Well, and I think with stories, you can say the same data 6 different ways, depending upon your audience, right?
Yes.
Anyhow, let's switch gears here. I know you've kind of talked about your business. I really want to step back and delve into that and give you the opportunity to talk about the things you do and how people can work with you or refer people to you.
Sure. There are 3 kinds of people I work with as a coach mostly. It's either help, I have to give a speech on November 8th and I don't know where I'm going or what to do and it's important. Or there's a program I give on a regular basis and I don't think I'm connecting with my audience as well as I could. An example was it was a financial planner and I was able to show him where he was losing his audience. And so now that he's giving that same program, it's a better program. Or the third bucket is every Wednesday I have to have a staff meeting and I can tell no one wants to be there. They're all bored by me or they look confused. I can tell they want to reach for their phones. I just want to be a better speaker in general, even though I never give the same program twice. So those are the 3 main buckets where I get clients, and people always want to help me to niche. Oh, if you niche, I'm like, oh, how do you niche people who need to speak more effectively? People in tech do, people in health do, the father of the bride needs to. I get those father of the bride or the best man speech. So if getting up there and presenting isn't your strong point, chances are you were never really shown how. For so many people, there's this horrible belief that if you know your topic and you know English, you should be able to give a presentation. And it's on you, but nobody ever really showed us the 15 to 20 things we need to know. And if we just learn them, they're all masterable. They're not that hard, but nobody's usually shown us how. And once I do, people go, oh, I can do this. The fear starts going away, the confidence builds, and we make that happen. And it happens fast. I turn people around in 5 visit packages, sometimes 10, depending on if they have a specific goal. It makes all the difference in the world. And the easiest way to find me, Milo Shapiro, just add that .com afterwards. MiloShapiro.com is where all my information, the team building and the speaking stuff is there as well.
I guess, how has COVID, well, not COVID, going into the lockdown, are you more virtual now or were you virtual before?
I was occasionally virtual on Skype when someone found out about me and wanted to work remotely. So we turned in this cool new thing called Skype and we made it work. Because of Zoom, not because of Zoom, because of COVID and the miracle that Zoom boom fell in our laps a week before COVID. Just if COVID had hit 3 years earlier, it would have been so much worse because we would have all been still trying to Skype one person at a time. So Zoom not that I do big group stuff with most of my coaching is one-on-one, occasionally 1-on-2, but Zoom just being so well known, I didn't have to train people in Zoom very much. Made it possible. And now I see almost no one in person. Even here in San Diego, I'm San Diego based. I had someone who was 4 miles away and I said, can I tell you all the reasons why we should meet on Zoom, even though we're in the same area? And she said, you don't think it'd be better to meet in person? I'm like, sometimes for certain purposes, but I've created modules that I can teach at a moment's notice if something comes up by bringing it up on my screen. That's not going to happen if we meet in person. If you're working on a script, I'll say, hold on, send that to me by email, put it up on the screen. I'm moving this sentence here. I'm changing this word. I'm going to put this in italics because I want your pitch to go up here. And then at the end of the session, I send it to her instead of writing notes in the margins of paper. And plus, more and more we are presenting on Zoom. If I teach people on Zoom, it translates beautifully to in person. But if I teach people in person, it doesn't always translate back here. So as I like to say, we feed two birds with one scone, because I don't like killing birds. I have birds. But we take care of both of those needs by doing it on Zoom. So I love Zoom coaching. I find it actually oddly more effective than being in person. But sometimes after a few visits, there's some reason to say, you know what? If possible, we should get together to work on your body language for just that. But even if they can't see me, you can see how I'm using my hands, how I'm using my face.
Right.
A lot that can be taught right here on Zoom.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was even thinking the fact that you can record. I mean, obviously, if you get in person, you can have a video recorder going. It's just a little more clunky. With Zoom, I think when we're done recording here, I'll wait 10 minutes. It downloads the files.
Yeah.
Somebody can do a playback and it just, watch the session, watch minute 10 through, 15, and then 25 through 30. So
before Zoom, people are always saying to me, well, do you record your clients to be able to show them what they're doing wrong? And I surprise people would say only as a last resort. People do not need to be shamed into how bad they are to be made better. If I can say, Debbie, what you're doing with your hands there looks frantic. Just put your hand at your, and then she does it right. Oh yeah, that did feel better. She doesn't need to see herself doing that. She got it from my saying it. So I tried to do it and then audio recording even before video recording, because there's something you and I are probably actually more the same age bracket than you think. That the Brady Bunch episode where Marsha's on TV and the red light goes on the camera and she just freezes. There's something about knowing this is the one that counts. It's being recorded that makes us unnatural.
Yeah.
So I think the recording can work against that. Likewise, I don't know, whoever told anyone to rehearse in front of a mirror. I have been stopping people for 19 years from rehearsing in front of mirrors because we want rehearsal to be as close to real life as possible. Is there ever going to be a speech where someone is going to stand 4 feet away from you and mimic every movement you make, who looks just like you, and you're going to be self-conscious of what they're doing? How is anyone supposed to do well while that's going on in front of them? So rehearse to a big open space across your living room, whatever, and imagine the people there. You don't need to see yourself. You'll know if you're doing well. If you're not sure, then maybe record yourself if you have to, but not the mirror. It's not your friend for this stuff.
Milo, thank you very much. People, miloshapiro.com. I will get that in the show notes. Appreciate you being here.
It was a pleasure. Good talking to you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.